In this episode, we are taking a closer look at one of the most recognizable parts of vulnerability management, because when many people first hear about defensive security work, the tool they imagine is a vulnerability scanner. That image is not wrong, but it is incomplete, because a scanner is not simply a machine that points at a target and produces perfect truth about what is broken. A vulnerability scanner is really an organized system for asking a large number of security questions about devices, operating systems, services, and applications, then comparing the answers to known patterns of weakness. The tools named in the title, Nessus and Open Vulnerability Assessment System, OpenVAS, are helpful examples because they represent the kind of platforms security teams use to discover missing patches, weak configurations, exposed services, and signs that systems may be at risk from known vulnerabilities. For a beginner, the main goal is not to memorize product details, but to understand what scanners are trying to do, why they matter, what their strengths are, and why a real analyst never treats their output as unquestionable fact. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A vulnerability scanner exists to reduce uncertainty across an environment that is usually far too large and fast-changing for humans to examine by hand. Organizations may have hundreds or thousands of endpoints, servers, cloud systems, network devices, and applications, and every one of those assets may change over time as software is installed, services are enabled, patches are applied, and settings drift away from the approved baseline. A scanner helps by automating the process of checking those systems against known conditions that often correlate with weakness, such as outdated software, insecure services, poor configuration choices, and missing security controls. This automation is essential because defenders need repeatable visibility, not just occasional manual inspection. Nessus and OpenVAS are well-known examples of this broader idea, and they help make the subject easier to understand because they show how scanners bring scale and consistency to a problem that would otherwise be overwhelming. Even so, the scanner is only one part of the process, because collecting findings is not the same as understanding risk or deciding what to fix first. At a basic level, a vulnerability scanner works by gathering information from targets and comparing what it finds against a large body of vulnerability knowledge. It may identify open ports, observe service behavior, inspect banners, compare software versions, check settings, or log in with authorized credentials to examine deeper system details from the inside. Once that information is collected, the scanner uses detection logic to decide whether a known weakness may be present. That logic is often built into modular checks, sometimes called plugins or tests, that are updated over time as new vulnerabilities and security guidance emerge. This is one reason scanners are not static products. Their usefulness depends heavily on how current their knowledge is and how well that knowledge is applied to the systems being examined. For a beginner, this is an important point because it explains why a scanner can be powerful without being magical. It is strong because it applies a lot of standardized security knowledge quickly and repeatedly, not because it somehow understands every system perfectly on its own. Nessus is often discussed as a widely recognized commercial vulnerability scanner, and it helps illustrate how a mature scanning platform is meant to function in practice. At a high level, a tool like Nessus provides a structured way to define scan scope, run assessments against chosen targets, apply large collections of detection checks, and present results in a way analysts can review and prioritize. It is not important for a new learner to focus on every feature or addition detail. What matters is understanding the role the tool plays in the workflow. A scanner like Nessus helps teams transform raw technical observation into organized findings that can be reviewed, validated, assigned, and tracked. It supports repeatability, which is essential because security teams need to know not only what is wrong today, but also whether the same issues remain next week, next month, or after a remediation cycle has supposedly been completed. That repeatability is one of the reasons scanners are so central to vulnerability management programs. OpenVAS is useful in the conversation because it represents the open source side of vulnerability scanning and helps beginners see that the core ideas of scanning are broader than any single vendor. Whether the platform is commercial or open source, the underlying mission remains similar. Gather evidence from systems, compare that evidence to known weakness patterns, and help analysts understand where further action may be needed. For students, this is valuable because it reduces the temptation to think of security tools as brand names first and security functions second. OpenVAS helps show that what really matters is the scanning concept itself, including coverage, detection logic, update quality, reporting clarity, and how well the results fit into the larger security process. In other words, defenders should care less about memorizing product labels and more about understanding why a scanner exists, what kinds of evidence it collects, how that evidence is interpreted, and what limitations come with that interpretation. That understanding transfers from one tool family to another much more effectively than brand trivia ever will. One of the most important things to understand about scanners like Nessus and OpenVAS is that they can work with different levels of visibility. In some cases, the scanner observes the target from the outside without logging in, which allows it to see exposed services, version clues, and network-reachable weaknesses from the perspective of an outsider. In other cases, the scanner uses authorized credentials to inspect the system more deeply, which may reveal missing patches, weak local settings, installed software, or security drift that would never be obvious from the network alone. This distinction matters because a scanner's findings depend heavily on how much access it has and what vantage point it is scanning from. A shallow view may show what is exposed, while a deeper view may show what is internally weak. Good analysts understand that both perspectives matter because real attackers often begin as outsiders and then look very different once they gain credentials or foothold access. That is why scanners are more useful when their results are interpreted through the lens of both exposure and internal condition rather than through a single narrow view. Another important lesson is that vulnerability scanners are excellent at pattern recognition, but they are not perfect judges of practical exploitability. A scanner might identify an outdated service version and report a vulnerability based on the version string it sees, even though the system has a backported fix that reduces the real risk. It may also miss a weakness if a banner is hidden, if the system responds in an unusual way, or if the right level of access was not available during the scan. These problems lead to false positives and false negatives, which are two of the most important ideas for new analysts to learn early. A false positive is a reported problem that does not actually exist in the dangerous way the tool suggests, while a false negative is a real problem that the tool failed to identify. Nessus, OpenVAS, and other scanners all operate within this reality, which means their reports should always be treated as evidence to analyze, not as final truth that automatically settles every question. Because scanners can generate very large numbers of findings, they are most useful when the analyst understands that detection is only the beginning of the work. A report full of severity labels and technical descriptions may look impressive, but it does not automatically tell the organization what matters most in its own environment. The scanner may be able to say that a vulnerability is known and technically serious, yet it cannot fully understand the business role of the asset, whether the vulnerable service is truly exposed to meaningful threat paths, or how difficult remediation may be without affecting operations. That is where human analysis becomes essential. Analysts must interpret the scan results in the context of asset importance, network location, compensating controls, operational sensitivity, and actual business impact. This is a critical habit for CySA Plus learners because a real defender does not become effective simply by collecting more findings. Effectiveness comes from knowing how to sort, validate, and prioritize those findings so that scarce remediation effort is aimed where it will reduce real risk. Scanners like Nessus and OpenVAS are also valuable because they support consistency over time. In security, one of the hardest problems is not finding a weakness once. It is finding out whether similar weaknesses keep appearing again and again because the underlying process never improves. A mature scanning program uses repeat assessments to show patterns across time, such as patching delays, recurring baseline drift, unsupported software that remains present across many systems, or repeated exposure of services that should have been removed. That recurring view helps organizations move beyond one-time cleanup efforts and toward continuous improvement. If the same classes of findings keep returning, the lesson may be that the organization has a weak deployment process, inconsistent hardening standards, poor ownership, or incomplete asset tracking. A scanner helps surface those patterns because it creates comparable evidence across multiple scans. That kind of longitudinal visibility is one of the most practical reasons these tools remain important even when they do not produce perfect or complete findings on every individual target. Another useful way to explain these tools to beginners is to separate breadth from depth. Vulnerability scanners are very good at broad coverage across many systems, which is one of their greatest strengths. They can inspect large environments far faster than a human analyst could by hand, and they can do so in a repeatable and organized manner. What they are not always as good at is deep contextual reasoning about unusual application logic, business workflows, hidden dependencies, or subtle exploit chains that require human creativity to uncover. That does not make the scanners weak. It simply means their role is different from that of a human tester or analyst performing manual investigation. Nessus and OpenVAS are best understood as scalable visibility platforms that help identify likely weakness patterns and reduce blind spots across large environments. When deeper interpretation or targeted validation is needed, the scanner's findings can guide where analysts should focus their time, rather than replacing that human effort altogether. It is also helpful to understand that scanners do not exist in isolation from the rest of security operations. Their results are often connected to asset inventories, reporting systems, ticketing workflows, exception management, and remediation tracking. In a healthy vulnerability management program, the scanner is not simply generating a static report that someone glances at once and forgets. Instead, it becomes part of a cycle in which assets are identified, findings are reviewed, owners are assigned, priorities are set, fixes are implemented, and follow-up scans confirm whether the problem was actually resolved. This matters because the value of the scanner is not in the moment the report appears. The value is in how the report changes defensive action. When students understand this, they stop thinking of tools like Nessus and OpenVAS as standalone technical products and start seeing them as engines inside a larger operational process. That is a much more realistic understanding of how scanning helps real organizations reduce security risk. A common beginner mistake is to assume that a scanner report is basically the same thing as a list of exploitable breaches waiting to happen. In reality, the report is usually a mixture of confirmed issues, likely issues, informational findings, environmental clues, and possible conditions that deserve human review before firm conclusions are made. Some findings may be urgent, some may be low priority, and some may turn out to be noise once validated. This is why a skilled analyst pays attention not only to what was reported, but also to how it was detected, how confident the evidence seems to be, and how the result fits into the broader context of the asset and the business. Nessus and OpenVAS both help surface these possibilities, but they do not remove the need for judgment. That is an important point to emphasize in an audio-first lesson, because new learners often feel pressure to trust the tool completely or dismiss it entirely. The right mindset is neither blind trust nor cynicism. It is disciplined interpretation. Another concept worth emphasizing is that scanners must be used responsibly because scanning creates real activity in real environments. Depending on the scan type, the volume of checks, and the sensitivity of the targets, a scan may generate load, fill logs, trigger alerts, or behave in ways that fragile systems do not tolerate well. This is especially important in older environments, specialized systems, or networks with operational technology where ordinary scanning assumptions may not hold. A mature team therefore plans scans thoughtfully, chooses scope carefully, communicates with affected stakeholders, and understands the difference between gaining useful visibility and causing avoidable disruption. This is not just an operational side note. It is part of what makes vulnerability management responsible rather than reckless. Nessus, OpenVAS, and similar tools are valuable because they can do a lot, but that same power means analysts need to understand where and how the tools should be used. Good security practice includes respecting the environment while still gathering the evidence needed to improve it. Over time, students should come to see vulnerability scanners as instruments for structured questioning rather than devices that deliver perfect answers. They ask whether a service appears outdated, whether a configuration deviates from safer practice, whether a patch seems missing, whether software behavior matches a known pattern of weakness, and whether a system might deserve closer human review. Nessus and OpenVAS help make this visible at a scale most organizations could not manage manually, and that alone makes them extremely valuable. Yet their real contribution becomes clear only when analysts combine scanner output with validation, business context, asset understanding, and thoughtful prioritization. The scanner helps reveal what might be wrong and where to look next, but it does not substitute for the reasoning needed to decide what matters most and what action should follow. That is why experienced defenders appreciate scanners deeply while still speaking about them with caution and precision. They know the scanner is a starting point for understanding, not the final word on reality. The main takeaway is that tools like Nessus and OpenVAS help explain what vulnerability scanners are really for. They provide scalable, repeatable ways to discover likely weaknesses across many systems by collecting evidence and comparing it to known vulnerability knowledge. They are strong at broad visibility, pattern recognition, and recurring assessment, and they help organizations turn enormous environments into something that can actually be reviewed and managed. At the same time, they are limited by access level, detection logic, environmental complexity, and the unavoidable presence of false positives and false negatives. Once you understand both sides clearly, you can see why vulnerability scanners matter so much in defensive security and also why real analysts never stop at the scan report. The scanner gives the organization a way to see more, faster, and more consistently, but it is human analysis that turns those findings into prioritized decisions and genuine risk reduction. That balanced understanding is what helps a beginner move beyond tool fascination and toward real security judgment.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.